Good evening, you're watching News Today at 9 p.m. I'm Preeti Chaudhary. The big talking points this evening over the course of the next 1 hour. Top focus, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar takes on the top court of the country. Executive versus judiciary debate once again reignited by none other than the Vice President. On the other hand, we're also going to focus on the big American dream. Is that over for Indian students? All of that coming up. All right, our top focus comes in with what the Vice President said. The Vice President of India, Jagdeep Dhankhar, has emerged as one of the strongest voices criticizing the Supreme Court, this time for setting deadlines for the President to clear bills and for invoking Article 142 to pass 10 bills cleared by the Tamil Nadu Assembly without executive assent. Take a look.
It is our obligation.
Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar takes on the Supreme Court. Speaking at the valedictory function of the 6th Rajya Sabha internship program on Thursday, Dhankhar hit out at the apex court, accusing the judiciary of overstepping constitutional boundaries.
The government is accountable. There is a directive to the President by a recent judgment. Where are we heading? What is happening in the country? I never thought in my life I'll have the occasion to see it. I have no doubt.
Dhankhar was referring to a recent order by a two-judge Supreme Court bench that set time frames for governors and the President to decide on bills passed by state assemblies. The verdict came on a petition filed by the MK Stalin government against Tamil Nadu Governor Ravi, who kept decisions on 10 bills pending for months. Dhankhar slammed the court for using powers under Article 142 to deliver the judgment.
Very contentious issues. Article 142. Article 142 has become a nuclear missile against democratic forces. Available to judiciary 24/7. My worries were at a very highest level. I never thought in my life I'll have the occasion to see it.
Under Article 142, the Supreme Court can pass orders beyond existing laws to ensure complete justice. Such orders are enforceable nationwide. The SC can also summon individuals, demand documents, and punish for contempt. The Vice President also questioned delays in the Justice Yashwant Verma burnt cash case.
Was put in the dock. It is now over a month. Even if it is can of worms, even if there are skeletons in the cupboard, time to blow up the can, time for its lid to go out, and time for the cupboard to collapse. Let the worms and skeletons be in public domain so that cleansing takes place.
Over the last 10 years, the executive and the judiciary have faced off on many issues, including appointment of judges. The latest war of words comes even as the apex court takes up many political sensitive cases like the challenge to the Waqf Amendment Act. With Srishti Ojha, Bureau Report, India Today.
All right, joining me right on top is Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi. He's a fourth-term MP, eminent jurist, senior advocate, Supreme Court, also a member of the Congress, senior Congress leader. Also, importantly, viewers, he has been the lead counsel in this case where he represented the government of Tamil Nadu. Appreciate you taking the time out, Mr. Singhvi, and joining us. First up, there's been a fair amount of commentary, Mr. Singhvi, on if the Vice President was out of line. Many suggest it's a constitutional, largely a ceremonial post. Should he have made these comments?
With the deepest and greatest respect and genuine respect to the Honorable Vice President, my answer is an emphatic no. He is the holder of high constitutional office, second in the warrant of precedence, and there is no occasion, no necessity, no requirement, no obligation to comment on all and sundry and issues like this. Does the President comment on this, Preeti? Have predecessor Vice Presidents commented routinely on such matters? Should the next person in the line of warrant of precedence, the Prime Minister, comment on such matters? My respectful answer is no. I think clearly it was uncalled for, unwarranted, and unnecessary. Before we come, of course, to the nitty-gritty of things like Article 142 and the case itself. But certainly, this was not, in fact, it is completely out of sync with the very high position which this is involved in the Vice President's post.
Mr. Singhvi, you had represented the Tamil Nadu government in the Supreme Court, where you had argued that the governor's action violated the Constitution. And in its verdict, the Supreme Court had held that Tamil Nadu's governor reservation of 10 bills for president's assent is illegal and had used its extraordinary, powers under Article 142. So in this particular case, if you're going point by point, you had Mr. Jagdeep Dhankhar, the vice president, who actually described Article 142 as, and I quote, nuclear missile against democratic forces, which allows the judiciary to act as a super parliament by enacting laws as seen in the case of Tamil Nadu. How do you respond to that characterization, Abhishek Manu Singhvi?
Before I use my own adjectives to deal with those very colorful adjectives you just quoted, you judge and your viewers judge for yourself. 142, let's just stick to the law first. We'll come to the facts later. 142 was not created yesterday. It was not created for this case. 142 was created by persons far wiser than all of us put together, our Constituent Assembly. It was created by Babasaheb Ambedkar and his drafting committee. It was created exclusively for the Supreme Court. It was deliberately and consciously stated not to be given to any other court in India, including any high court. The idea was that this is a sui generis, special, unique power to the apex court, who is the custodian of the trust of the entire nation, to do complete justice in very, very extreme cases or cases which deserve it from going beyond the mere letter of the law, to implement the spirit of the law, to do complete justice. Secondly, you must remember, Preeti, it is not an uncanalized power. It is not Jungle Raj. It is not chaotic. It is cribbed, canalized, circumscribed, conditioned by at least 20 to 40 major Supreme Court judgments over the 75-year-old journey. It is exercised on criteria laid down in those judgments. So to suggest, all I can say is the missile is probably coming from elsewhere than the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is exercising its constitutional power. When it strikes down law, when it strikes down executive action, when it strikes down governor's action, it routinely does it in 356. It did it in Bombay. Can you call it a super parliament? I'll come to the facts of this case and make good to you presently how, if at all there was an understatement of the law and the facts by the Supreme Court, everything said there was completely deserved. But as far as the law is concerned, I think this is clearly not justified language for a judgment.
Dr. Singhvi, the fact is you were the lead counsel on this particular case. You've explained the bit on, invoking section or article 142. On the other hand, what many suggest that possibly when it came down to the role of the governor, the top court was correct, but there has been a legal discourse which seems to suggest that when Mr. Dhankhar objected to the court setting a 3-month deadline to the president to act on bills, claiming it undermines constitutional role, that is a grey area.
I will come to the president in a minute. But the first preliminary question I ask myself and you and your viewers, none of these high constitutional authorities thought it right to comment on or chastise other constitutional authorities who sat on bills for 1.25 years in the case of Tamil Nadu. You are now chastising the Supreme Court. Was it right or wrong for a governor neither to pass the bill, assent to it, nor send it back? So a decision not to decide became a decision. Now look at the other steps before I come to the president. In the first place, you don't decide. And in the first place, while it's pending with you, you do not also refer it to the president. The Tamil Nadu government goes to the court. Immediately, you send it back to the Tamil Nadu government. It requires the Tamil Nadu government to go to court for the governor to refer it back. When the Tamil Nadu government sends it a second time, you know that you are bound, so you refer it to the president this time. When Babasaheb said that institutions are only as good or bad as the governors or the persons or the man or woman who mans it, this is what he meant. The constitution can't tell the governor everything how to do it. It is the spirit which is being violated by high constitutional functionaries from Tamil Nadu to Bengal to Punjab and many other states. And it is happening particularly in opposition rule states where you are supposed to be the agent of the central government, as if you are acting as some kind of a, obstruction or barrier to governance. Now let's come to the President. The structure of the articles of the Constitution which deal with the assent to a bill by either the President or the Governor are identical or almost identical. There is no difference. The only difference arises that the President cannot refer it further to a President. That is the difference with the Governor. But as far as the time limit is concerned, if it is kosher to put a time limit for the Governor, in what way is an Article 142 misused if the same time limit is put for the President? It doesn't mean that the current President has done anything like that. As a matter of fact, with the current government, to imagine that the President would keep it pending for a year and a half would be unthinkable. But it is not unthinkable for an opposition state like Tamil Nadu. It is not unthinkable for states like West Bengal and Punjab. But in theory, why should a President sit on it? And let me tell you one more thing. The Governor who was involved in these 10 bills or whatever, 11 bills, all the bills fell squarely in list 2, which is exclusive state competence. There was no reason to hold it or then to refer it. There were local matters like municipalities or sewerage or this and that. So really, it's the spirit of how you operate the Constitution which matters. And when all this is happening under your nose with the governors, why are high constitutional functionaries not commenting adversely on that gubernatorial overreach instead of chastising the Supreme Court? And the office of governor was intended by Baba Sahib. He said there can't be two swords in one scabbard. Ek myan mein do talwar nahi. The chief minister is the governor of that state in terms of governance. And you can't obstruct his governance by keeping bills pending. The same applies to the central government and the president. Yes, I agree that the deemed assent is not written in the Constitution. Yes, I agree that 3 months or 2 months is not written in the Constitution. But if 142 is not used for this, what is 142 created for? Why did Baba Sahib and the Constituent Assembly give this power exclusively as a unique power to the Supreme Court? Only for such situations where governance has been obstructed and stopped by persons who were entrusted with governors. So who will guard the guardians? Who will govern the governors? Only the Supreme Court.
Dr. Singhvi, last 2 questions that I'd ask you. The Tamil Nadu judgment has been hailed historic by some, unprecedented also by many. Do you think this judgment is somewhere down the line going to set a precedent or the verdict will shape the state and center relationship, especially where opposition-governed states are concerned?
Before I answer your question, 5 seconds on the fact that people forget what meticulous research, industry, and comprehensiveness went into this judgment. The bench more than once gave us detailed queries, nuances, issues, sought opinion of all, including the Attorney General and our side, got researchers put on each of those issues. A lot of pain and effort went into this. It's not a casual thing on which casual comments can be made. Secondly, absolutely yes, it is already a precedent. It's a judgment of the Supreme Court, which under Articles 141 and 142 is fully binding on everybody in this country, including the highest constitutional authorities. And they are obliged to implement it in letter and spirit. That's what 141 read with 142 means. Thirdly, it is a clear message, a somewhat delayed, much desired, much necessary, vitally necessary message to all governors. You are not supari agents of the central government. You are not there to obstruct governance. You are not there as a parallel chief minister. You are there to aid and assist governance and be the overall friend, philosopher, and guide instead of being 2 swords in one scabbard, 2 chief ministers in one state. I think that larger message is also implicit in the judgment, but I would strongly support every word and the industry and the care and the caution which judgment is written. And unfortunately, I think some of the strong words used as adjectives about the judgment are completely uncalled for, unjustified and unnecessary.
But the Vice President, Dr. Singhvi, did raise, which are shared by many, broader concerns about judicial accountability, overreach, or, judicial activism. And on many accounts, be it the large hauls of cash that were found in a judge's house and the kind of action, that was taken, or even you've had the speaker or, the former law minister Kiran Rijiju speak about the NJSC verdict or the collegium. So he has raised broader concerns, which many are speaking of today.
First of all, with greatest respect, unfortunately, there is no connectivity in speaking in the same breath about this judgment and the episode involving Justice Verma. You can't begin to connect the North Pole and the South Pole for no reason at all. I don't understand how one reflects on the other in any remotest manner. It was equally inappropriate to link them. I'm saying so very clearly. Secondly, everybody knows that there is a procedure established, not created yesterday for you or me or for Justice Verma. An in-house procedure has been in operation for decades. It is under that procedure that the Chief Justice of India has taken steps. 3 vice persons, 2 Chief Justices and 1 lady judge of seniority are looking into it. The report will be out soon. Why should we suddenly change that procedure? Had that procedure not been followed by Yashwant Verma, is there any other law which the Honorable Vice President would want us to follow? How can you hearken to a system which is in existence being followed versus a non-existent system of no other system is available to do this? Yes, if you pass a law in future for these matters to go short of impeachment to the Parliament, then that will be the law followed. In fact, I was chairman of a committee way back in 2011, a parliamentary standing committee, which recommended the Judicial Accountability Bill that never became law. But till such time, it's the only in-house procedure which will govern. And lastly, it is not the time and place because the whole comment was on the judgment. It has nothing to do with the Yashwant Verma episode. But let us not let us hasten slowly. Let us not use a push-button system that Yashwant Verma episode means push-button, and lo and behold, by a magical wand, you have NJSC, and all these ills vanish into thin air because of this magical wand called NJSC. Please don't use one to implement the other. Please don't use one to further some agenda which is other than relevant.
All right, Dr. Singhvi, appreciate you taking the time out and joining us this evening. Thank you there. Viewers, let's quickly move on. We are joined right now by Aryama Sundaram, a senior advocate, Supreme Court lawyer. My first question, sir, is what I asked Dr. Singhvi as well. Would you reckon the Vice President was out of line with the comments that he made regarding the top court of the country, keeping in mind that his position is largely ceremonial, constitutional?
From what India was meant to be, what the framers of the Constitution expected things to be, and what was anticipated was that governors would be statesmen who would be above any politics, who would not be playing to political masters, as were speakers of the legislature in those days, answerable for the dignity of the House and not answering to political masters. It was with that intent that the framers of the Constitution gave the governors their powers, gave the speakers of the legislatures their powers as masters of the legislature. Unfortunately, over a period of time, and I'm sorry it started as early as in the 1970s, both the governors and speakers became nothing more than puppets of their political masters, of the ruling party in power at the given time who had appointed them, or of the majority house of whom they were the representative and therefore became a speaker. Now, when you look at it that way, what do you do? Because the framers of the Constitution expected these people to act in accordance with the Constitution and to discharge their functions in accordance with the Constitution. Now, this is where the court comes in. I don't think it is a power exercise by the court. I think it is a discharge of its responsibility that the court has had to pass the kind of judgment that it did. The reason being that if a governor does not discharge his functions under the Constitution, it becomes the duty of the Constitutional Court, which has been charged with the function of ensuring compliance with the Constitution, to ensure that every constitutional functionary, every statutory functionary functions in accordance with the Constitution. So I believe that the judgment of the Supreme Court was absolutely necessary and correct in the facts of the matter, where a governor of a state has just stalled all progress of the state by acting in a manner which the Constitution does not envisage him to act, by not approving of bills, and by doing so, I'm sorry to say, brought the office of governor into a situation, into a position where the court was forced to interfere, and in fact had to very clearly say that it is the duty of the governor to act in accordance with the Constitution. If he does not do so, we as a court will ensure that he does so.
So, Mr. Sundaram, from the question that I asked you first, I concur. You do not agree with what the Vice President said, accusing the judiciary of judicial activism, overreach, and you know where he called out Article 142 as, the judiciary acting like a super parliament.
I said the Vice President is speaking from the expectation of the framers of the Constitution that these constitutional authorities will act in accordance with the Constitution. And he is really stating something which even the framers of the Constitution would have wanted, that the courts would not ever come into the realm of either the legislature or the executive, and that was the basis of separation of powers. So he's talking from a position of that. But please remember that taking an unconstitutional decision is no different than not taking a decision that you're meant to take under the Constitution. Both are equally correctable by judicial review, and what the Supreme Court has done is exercised its powers of judicial review, which has been given under the Constitution, to ensure that these people who have been charged with such constitutional functions act in accordance with the Constitution. And remember, inaction or not acting in accordance with are not acting as you are required to do under the Constitution is no different from acting against the Constitution. And the court has to interfere. And the court rightly passed the judgment that it did.
All right, so Mr. Sundaram, allow me to go point by point. The Vice President called Article 142 a nuclear missile against democratic forces. He's gone on to criticize why it's being used frequently by the Supreme Court. Do you believe this characterization is justified, or is it Article 142 an essential tool for ensuring justice?
Article 142 is to ensure that complete justice is done. Article 142 ensures that the Constitution is complied with and has been given this power to the Supreme Court to ensure that. Should Article 142 be used? According to me, very, very rarely, only when situations will arise which absolutely call for it. So the Vice President may be right in saying Article 142 should not be used in every situation. But in this given fact, in this given case, I think most correctly has the Supreme Court come in. I won't say it is only Article 142. It is also the exercise of the judicial powers of the Supreme Court to direct a constitutional functionary to act in accordance with the Constitution.
But Mr. Sundaram, the Vice President then also argues that the Supreme Court's directive to the President to act on bills within a 3-month deadline oversteps judicial authority, where he's accusing the judiciary of possible judicial overreach. Do you think the Supreme Court has restrained itself?
Well, what the Supreme Court has said in this case is not much different than it has had to say in cases where the Speaker of the legislature did not act in accordance with Schedule 10 of the Constitution with regard to disqualification petitions. Speakers would just sit on disqualification petitions without taking decisions on it, and then say judicial review cannot come into play because the court should not interfere with the Speaker's actions. But that, the Supreme Court has clearly said that the Speaker has a duty to act in accordance with the Constitution, has a duty to act in accordance with Schedule 10, and if the Speaker does not act, the Supreme Court can direct him to act. And in those cases, there is a case where the Supreme Court gave a deadline of 3 months. Subsequently, in the Maharashtra case, the Supreme Court gave a deadline of 2 months by which the Speaker was to take a decision. Now, a similar argument was put up there, and that's not much different than what is being said now. The point of the matter is, let's not forget what has happened. Let's not forget that a governor has sat on bills, not for days, not for weeks, for months, and if I'm not mistaken, in a certain case, even for a year, without passing a bill. Now, without approving a bill, without giving his assent. In other words, he brings the entire constitutional machinery to a standstill. Now, is a court meant to sit back and say, oh, we cannot interfere, we cannot give directions, we should allow a situation to arise where there's a complete constitutional breakdown because the governor does not act? I'd say if the Supreme Court did so, the Supreme Court would be abdicating its functions and its duties and responsibilities.
Mr. Sundaram, the Vice President also questioned the judiciary's authority to direct the President. While the opposition leaders have defended the courts, arguing that no office, including the Vice President, is above the President is above constitutional security. As per you, was the two-judge bench in the Tamil Nadu case constitutionally competent to issue such a ruling?
To answer you, absolutely constitutionally competent, because one thing we should never forget is that the Constitution is above everyone. The Constitution is above the court. The Constitution is above the executive. The Constitution is above Parliament. It is constitutional morality which has to be protected, and that looms large. And if any constitutional functionary does not act in accordance with the Constitution, there is no amount of protection through separation of powers or Article 145 or whatever else you will bring into play, which can protect constitutional constitutional violation by constitutional authorities. And I say inaction, non-action, stalling by constitutional functionaries is equally a violation of the Constitution. And I believe that what the Supreme Court said was absolutely correct. And especially in the facts of this case, it was absolutely called for.
But all of this also comes in the backdrop of what has been very deep criticism of, the judiciary handling of many cases, be it what we discussed, the cash haul at Justice Yashwant's residence, questioning why no FIR was filed and why a three-judge committee rather than, the executive is investigating. The question is also, does the judiciary have the constitutional authority to self-investigate such matters, or does the support of the Vice President's claim of judicial unaccountability, because that has brought a debate in society today?
I think this is quite an old situation where any judicial member does not act according to the court, or his conduct as such that has raised certain questions which has to be inquired into, that the judiciary itself, through a high-powered judicial committee of very senior judges, usually investigates the matter. This is nothing new at all. This is something which has been done in the past. And in fact, even when you move for impeachment, let us say, of a judge, the first stage after the admission of the impeachment petition is that a panel is set up by the Chief Justice, consisting of a judge of the Supreme Court, a Chief Justice of a state, and an eminent jurist, to go into this and to give their report as to whether a case for impeachment is in fact made out. So the judiciary looking into these affairs is not wrong. Now, let's not forget something. The judiciary's duty is to look into matters like this. If there is impropriety, alleged impropriety in the judiciary has a duty to look into it first. And I think what is being done now in this case is really not a departure, but is something which has been done in the past in other cases also.
All right, appreciate you joining us, Mr. Sundaram. Thank you for taking the time out. Let me quickly now move on to Dushyant Dave, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, who's joining us live. Thank you, sir, for taking the time out, joining us. Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar, in a speech, questioned recent Supreme Court verdict that has set time frames for President in deciding bills passed by state assemblies. He has said, President of India is a very elevated position. President takes oath to preserve, protect, defend the Constitution. There is a directive to the President by a recent judgment. Where are we heading? What is happening in the country is what he seems to suggest, that the court has overstepped by setting a time frame for the president to act?
Well, first and foremost, I regard Vice President Mr. Dhankhar quite personally, very highly. And I'm therefore quite surprised and disappointed that being a lawyer and having known Constitution quite well, he should make the kind of statements that he has. I think with greatest respects to Vice President Mr. Dhankhar, each of his statements is constitutionally incorrect. There is one principle that we have in this country, that be you ever so high, the Constitution is above you. The Constitution is above the president, Constitution is above the governor of a state. And both the president and the governor take oath under the Constitution. There is a constitutional oath to uphold the Constitution. Now, in a democracy like India, we are a parliamentary democracy with the executive, legislature, and judiciary. Each has its own role. And judiciary's role in that separation of power is to ensure that both the executive and the legislature, that the parliament, remain, in check. Now, therefore, a judiciary has an absolute right of overseeing the actions or inactions on the part of the executive. That may include the president, that may include the governor. So I don't think Vice President is at all right, because, ultimately, what is it that is happening today? In non-BJP states or opposition-ruled states, the governor after governor is refusing to clear the bills which are passed by the legislative assemblies. Now, these bills reflect the will of the people of the state. It may not be the will of, the majority party in the center, namely the BJP, but it is the will of the people of the state. Now, governor, therefore, is bound by the Constitution to approve them as quickly as possible. And if at all he disagrees, he has a right to refer it to the president. That doesn't mean now that the president should sit over, what is referred to by the governor for an indefinite period. We must understand that every power under the Constitution is subject to judicial review. And one thing is very clear, that every power is coupled with a duty. Therefore, the president and the governor both are under duty to uphold the Constitution and approve those bills as the will of the people. Secondly, both the president and the governor are bound to exercise power within a reasonable period of time. Every power must be exercised reasonably and as soon as possible. You can't sit over these, bills for a long period of time. Ultimately, people of the state want that. They have elected their representatives, and those elected representatives of the state who form a majority in the state, they have approved those. The legislature has approved. So I think, with greatest respects to Mr. Dhankhar, I think he's far from the constitutional position.
All right, but Mr. Dave, going into what the Vice President has listed or what he thinks are issues with that verdict, he says, and I quote, "We cannot have a situation where you direct the President of India on what basis. The only right you have under the Constitution is to interpret the Constitution under Article 145(3). There it has to be a 5-judge or more." This particular judgment was delivered by 2 judges, Justice Pardiwala and R. Mahadev. Now, does that fall foul of the Constitution is the question, which is what the Vice President says it does.
Well, I must say one thing, that I'm surprised that Vice President has made a statement like that, because he has forgotten to read Article 32 of the Constitution, which itself is a fundamental right. And Article 32 obliges the Supreme Court to issue appropriate writ of mandamus certiorari prohibition, as the case may be, to direct every authority in this country to act in accordance with the Constitution and in accordance with law. Therefore, this is completely, I would say it's an absurd suggestion on the part of the Honorable Vice President to say that Supreme Court can't issue such a directive. If the President and the Governor take law into their own hands, then Supreme Court has an absolute duty to intervene and issue such a direction. And the President and the Governor are bound to act in furtherance of that direction. If they don't, it amounts to breaking up of the rule of law, and nothing of democracy will remain. And that's precisely, the problem today is what? that the Bharatiya Janata Party wishes that this country is opposition mukt, not just Congress mukt. Therefore, every state in which opposition is, in power, the kind of governors who are appointed and the kind of behavior these governors have reflected over a period of time is, to say the least, absolutely unconstitutional, disappointing, and many a times shameful. The governors have no role under the constitution to act as, exercise administrative powers. Their role is a very limited role. Their discretion is extremely limited, which is guided by the constitution. So what is happening, you will see that in BJP-run states, governors don't behave like this. They don't advise the chief minister. They don't appoint the vice chancellors. They don't go where riots have taken place. They don't do all that. But it's only in BJP states that the governors are functioning, and it seems that there is a pattern why central government is appointing such persons in high constitutional offices as governors in these states. I must say that the Honorable President of India has conducted herself extremely well in a very dignified manner. Yes, in a given case, if she has set over a particular approval of a bill, it is wrong, and Supreme Court has corrected. But the governors, again and again, you will see their conduct is really unbecoming of the high constitutional offices they hold. And I think a high time Prime Minister intervenes and ensures that some good people are appointed as governors who really will act as per the law, as per the constitution.
Mr. Dave, the Vice President referred to the framers of the constitution and the debates that took place then. He pointed at the appointment process of judges. He says Article 124 mentions consultation, and consultation is not concurrence. He says this added by Supreme Court later and questioned the second judge's case verdict.
Well, so far as the collegium system is concerned, Vice President may be right. In fact, I have myself been an open and vocal critic of the collegium system. I certainly agree that the second judge's judgment case is completely wrong, and the judiciary has, taken away the power of appointment and transfer of the High Court and High Court judges and appointment of Supreme Court judges from the executive in an unconstitutional manner. I have no doubt about that. So on this point, of course, I agree with the Vice President.
All right. Moreover, Dhankhar, the Vice President also criticized the judiciary for lacking accountability, particularly in the context of the reported cash haul at Justice Yashwant Verma's residence, where no FIR has been filed and a judicial committee is investigating. Do you agree with at least this view, that investigation of judges should be in some way fall under the executive's domain? And how should the judiciary balance independence with accountability?
Well, I quite agree with the Vice President that Justice Verma's saga is very disturbing. And I am one of those persons who believes that while maintaining, strictly the fiercely independence of judiciary, some mechanism must be set into motion, which is, which can really bring these judges accountable. And there is no doubt that there is large-scale corruption in judiciary, and those corrupt judges are really undermining the institution and are really undermining far more good judges who comprise the judicial system. But I must say one thing. I mean, and this is where Vice President should ask, his own government, that why is it that if the cash was found, the police did not register a case immediately? Why was ED not brought into action? Why is it that it was hidden for 4 days? And is it possible that this was not brought to the notice of the Honorable Home Minister and Honorable Prime Minister? So I think that government has a lot to answer here. Who facilitated removal of the cash? I mean, if the police went there, it is shocking that the cash is removed from there. So, Vice President perhaps should, hold his government accountable and ask the government to really place the facts on the floor of the Rajya Sabha.
All right. Appreciate you taking the time out, joining us, Mr. Dave. Thank you there. I want to quickly move on. We're trying to get in as much legal opinion on what the Vice President said as possible. I have with me Alok Prasanna Kumar, co-founder with the Center for Legal Policy. He's one of the few legal eyes who feels that at least in the context of the court asking or setting a deadline for the president, a 3-month deadline to act on bills, the Vice President was right, at least in questioning that. Appreciate you taking the time out. So first up, your quick response to the President's criticism of the Supreme Court.
I think the Vice President has...
yeah. Go ahead, sir.
He's partly right and partly wrong. And I think he's partly wrong for all the reasons which I think Mr. Sundaram and Mr. Dave have said, and I won't repeat myself. Where I think he's partly right is that the constitutional position is that the President can only act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Nowhere in the Constitution is it provided, and it's a very, very exceptional situation, which is in the formation of a government, that the President acts in her discretion. That is the only situation that the Constitution envisages discretion for the President. Everywhere else, the President literally cannot lift a pen without the Council of Ministers advising her to do so. The Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers advising her to do so. Now, the court has created a new constitutional requirement that there is an occasion where the court will direct the President to act. Now, this is a change. Is it a good change or a bad change? We don't know. It comes in a particular context, which I think no one can dispute that the actions of Governor R.N. Ravi are simply unconstitutional. They're unconscionable and they're unconstitutional. Should this have been the remedy that the court chose? That is what I'd like to question. And to be fair to the court, maybe there is no other remedy, right? I'm only critiquing. I'm not the one providing the solution. But I'm only here to raise the question that are we okay with the President now acting on the direction of the court, not the aid and advice? Because the President is not like any other regular legal functionary. A mandamus is meant for a regular legal functionary to do their duty, right? It was not intended for high constitutional authorities like the Speaker or the Governor or the President. But we have gotten to a situation where these high constitutional authorities are saying we are going to subvert the Constitution by not exercising our powers. It's one thing if the court says they're right or wrong, but it's a completely different thing for them to say, I will simply refuse to act and thereby subvert a democratically elected government or work to overthrow a democratically elected government. And I think this is where, to go back to the point that Vice President Dhankhar made, if he goes back and sees what the Constituent Assembly debates were about, this is not what the governor is supposed to do. This is not what the Speaker is supposed to do. And I think in good conscience and in good faith, if he had to criticize, he would start by criticizing the actions of speakers who refuse to decide on defections, on governors who refuse to refuse bills, and the President acting on the advice of Council of Ministers simply rejecting bills of the State Assembly. That's not what the purpose of referring to the President is. So I think he's partly right, but he's also partly wrong.
But in the area where you feel he's partly right comes from the fact that the court should not have set a 3-month deadline for the President. And I would reckon with that, with the other legal experts who came in, seem to suggest, and I'll just, speak of what Mr. Sundaram said, that taking an unconstitutional decision is exactly the same as not taking a decision. And, which was aided by what earlier Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi said, that the President also falls within the framework of the Constitution. So there's nothing, it's exemplary, it's unprecedented, but there's nothing wrong with the court did.
No, I would say there is something, I wouldn't say it's wrong, it's something which is new. And we don't know if that new is good or bad, which is the court directing the President. Now, again, I'm not here to give the solution. I'm here to basically only critique the court, which is that directing the President is problematic. It is problematic within the scope of our Constitution. The President of India basically stands in the position of the monarch of UK. There's no court in the world which can direct the monarch of the United Kingdom to do anything. And there is no court in India which was intended to direct the President. But unfortunately, we have arrived at this situation where the court has to somehow try and save the Constitution. I understand where the court is coming from. This is where I'd like to come to another point, which I think was slightly made by one of the speakers. I believe they should have gone to a 5-judge bench. I believe the 2-judge bench should have said... Which was something which
even the Vice President said.
Exactly. Right? To that extent, I think he has a valid point. I'm not saying the decision is wrong for that reason. I'm saying the decision could have been better if they had referred it to a 5-judge bench. It would have had acceptance. It would have been accepted as, look, this is an issue that was seriously debated. That this was an issue that was debated among 5 judges and should have arrived at a conclusion which is more acceptable. So I would say they perhaps made a misstep in not referring this crucial issue to a 5-judge bench.
All right. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you for taking the time out. We've tried to get you all kinds of perspective from different legal experts on what the Vice President said, something which has been contentious and deeply debated. All right, a rather big story. US President Donald Trump's war against higher education institutes continue. On Thursday, he called Harvard University a disgrace and that Ivy League schools are abusing its tax-exempt status. But Harvard didn't flinch. In response, the university said that there was no legal basis to rescind its tax-exempt status, and such an action will be unprecedented. Now, campus protests from Colombia to California unites people and the academia world in a fight against the Trump administration.
Students, educators, activists, and common people all are protesting against the Trump administration's war with universities.
When higher education is under attack, what do?
Once Harvard University refused to bow down to Donald Trump's diktats. Others have joined in to stand up for academic freedom and protest what they described as political repression, censorship, and attacks on higher education under US President Donald Trump. From Berkeley in California to New York to Washington, D.C. Protesters demanded hands off our education from the administration.
Tyranny cannot exist unless people submit to it. And we are not going to submit.
Students at Harvard University in Cambridge vowed not to bow down. The university was threatened by Homeland Security that it will lose its ability to enroll foreign students if it does not meet demands from the Trump administration to share information on some visa holders, marking the government's latest escalation against the educational institution.
I think it would be something we discuss because
we wanted to show that Harvard can stand together united, saying we're not going to cave to demands that we turn in some international student names so that they can be have their visas revoked without a just cause, and they can be deported back to their home countries.
Students at Columbia University protested in front of the campus after the university accepted policy changes by the Trump administration. The changes included placing the Middle East Studies Department under supervision, hiring new safety personnel who can make arrests, and banning face masks for the purpose of concealing one's identity. The university also agreed to appoint a senior provost tasked with reviewing several international studies departments, leadership, and curriculum.
They care about the financial viability of the institution.
Similar demands were made to Harvard University, and when it refused, federal grants and funds of billions of dollars were frozen. And then the president threatened the Ivy League school with withdrawal of tax exemption benefits.
I think it would be something we discuss.
Because I think Harvard's a disgrace. I think what they did was a disgrace. They're obviously anti-Semitic, and all of a sudden they're starting to behave. But tax-exempt status, I mean, it's a privilege. It's really a privilege, and it's been abused by a lot more than Harvard, too, by a lot more than Harvard. So we'll see how that all works out.
The fight continues between the top schools led by Harvard University and the Trump administration. Bureau Report, India Today.
All right, joining me for more is a visa counselor and alumni of Harvard, Dr. Karun Gupta. Thank you for joining us this evening. Dr. Gupta, I'd just, begin with one figure. Now, India constitutes 50% of the 327 cases in which the United States of America has revoked student visas since the Donald Trump administration has taken over. That somewhere down the line completely dampens the great Indian American dream.
Thank you, Preeti, for having me. So before we declare that the American dream is over, we need to really understand the facts behind these headlines, and we need to separate these facts from emotion. The visa revocations that we're talking about, yes, 50% affecting Indian students, we must put them in the right context. So this is not a hostile shift in US policy. It's the result of stricter compliance and growing digital scrutiny. It's not political targeting of our Indian students. Now, if we look at why we're getting these visa revocations, it's unintentional student visa lapses like not enrolling full-time, failure to possibly report changes in employment during OPT, minor infractions like unpaid traffic tickets or social media posts which are misinterpreted, visa fraud in rare cases. So what we are seeing is consequences of poor compliance, not mass exclusion. And a very important number to keep in mind is that out of 10 lakh international students in the US, we're talking about 1,000 visa revocations, which is 0.001%. So really, let's not forget that Indian students are not being pushed out. They're still being admitted, employed, and valued in record numbers.
But the fact that, most Indian students apply to the what is proverbially considered the non-elite institutions, smaller universities, they're going to be badly hit by the new, policies by the Trump administration.
See, currently, we have over 331,000 Indian students in the US. And if you look at how much money international students in general bring to America, that's $43.5 billion a year. That's what the NAFTA reports. They support like 400,000 US jobs. The US is not going to make policies to hurt international students. What we are witnessing here, and I was just watching this entire protests by the students, and what we are witnessing here is a clash between some universities and the current administration. Our students need to stay out of this. In a couple of months, this is going to roll over. Things are going to be back to where they were. Our students should focus on what they're going for, which is to study.
One final question. Harvard's already said that foreign students applying for a visa, if they're going to Harvard, they're not going to get it.
Again, that is a warning that Harvard is giving because it's a threat that they've received from the current administration. We don't think that this is going to follow through. We're still in April. Students are going to apply for their visas in August. They're still going to have ample time to apply. If at all this problem persists, Harvard is going to give them certain part of their program online and bring them to the United States when the time is right.
And when that timing will be right is the big question, sir. Because that's a lot at stake for a student who's looking to study at Harvard, keeping in mind how prestigious that application is. But thank you for taking the time out and joining us this evening. Appreciate it.